Blood dripped onto the sidewalk as I sat there in the cold night air. My own daughter had just thrown me out like trash. My son-in-law's fist still burned on my cheek. All because I said no to $3 million. But what they didn't know was that I had a secret weapon waiting in the shadows. Someone they never saw coming. Before we dive into this shocking story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from around the world. I love connecting with all of you amazing viewers. The punch came so fast I didn't see it coming. Marcus, my daughter's husband, hit me right in the face. Then my own child, Sarah, grabbed my gray hair and dragged me across the floor like I was nothing. Like the woman who gave birth to her, who raised her, who sacrificed everything for her, meant absolutely nothing. If watching a daughter drag her own mother by the hair over $3 million doesn't make you hit subscribe, then comment right now and explain why loyalty means so little to you. I sat on that cold curb, shaking and bleeding, wondering how the sweet little girl I once tucked into bed every night became this monster. But here's what they didn't know. I had been ready for this moment for weeks. And in exactly 1 hour, their whole world was about to crumble. Let me take you back to where it all started. I moved into Sarah's house the week after my 73rd birthday. Not because I needed help or couldn't take care of myself anymore. Sarah told me she missed me. She said she wanted me close. She even said Marcus agreed to it. Back then, I thought it was love. I had no idea it was all part of their plan. Their house sat on a quiet street in Phoenix, Arizona. It had a big front porch and a white swing that nobody ever used. Sarah had fixed up the guest room with purple and cream colors, my favorites. She put fresh sheets on the bed and placed a picture of us from her college graduation on the little table next to it. I remember standing there with my suitcase, thinking maybe this would be good. Maybe we could finally be close again after all these years. It wasn't like I had nowhere else to go. I had my own small apartment in Tucson. I used to work part-time at the city museum, helping with old records and teaching people about family history. That job meant everything to me. So did the peace of my own little home, my tiny kitchen, my collection of all figurines. But Sarah said she missed our dinners together. She said she wanted her kids to hear my stories about our family. I believed every word. The first week felt wonderful. She made me hot chocolate every night. Marcus asked about my old job at the museum. The grandkids sat with me while I told them stories about how our family came from Scotland long ago. I felt silly for ever doubting her. But then little things started changing. Sarah began talking about money problems more and more. Her voice sounded light and happy, but the words were heavy. She talked about house payments, about saving for the kids' college, about how hard things had become. Marcus mentioned some business deal through one of his clients, some property investment that would make lots of money, with no risk. He said it casually while cutting chicken at dinner one night. I nodded and smiled, but something inside me felt wrong. A few days later, Sarah came into my room carrying a folder. Inside were bank papers, forms to sign, and a printout of my savings account. She sat down next to me on the bed. Her voice was very careful. She said they just needed to borrow some money for a short time. She said they'd pay it back in 6 months. She said it would help secure their future and help the kids. I asked her how she got my bank information. She smiled, but her eyes didn't look happy. She said she'd always known my passwords. She said she needed to check on me sometimes to make sure I was okay. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. Something had broken. I thought about my husband who had died years ago, how we had saved our money bit by bit, never spending the main amount. I thought about the time I loaned Sarah $2,200 to fix her car, and she never paid me back. I realized I had moved into a house where love came with a price. She gave everything to her child, only to find out love was just a cover for greed. If you can watch that and still not subscribe, at least have the courage to drop a comment and tell us why betrayal doesn't shake you. By the end of that second week, I started locking my bedroom door at night. Have you ever felt that moment when everything changes? when a hug becomes about getting something from you, when kindness becomes about money. If you've ever trusted someone so much that you moved into their home, only to feel trapped, then you know exactly what I mean. And if you haven't yet, stay with me. Because what happened next tore everything apart. And once I saw the truth, there was no going back. By the start of the third week, things went from sneaky to obvious. I noticed it first with the grocery store receipts. I always offered to pay for my food, milk, bread, my specialty. But one day, Sarah left a receipt on the counter with items circled in red pen and wrote a total next to it. Then she added a note that said, "Your share. Thanks." No hello, no smiley face, just a number. Later that night, she gave me a printed list of the monthly bills, electricity, water, gas, all highlighted and organized in columns. She pointed to my name at the bottom and said in a calm voice that being fair keeps things clear. She said that's how families stay strong. Marcus didn't talk much that night, but he nodded while looking at his phone. I didn't argue. I walked upstairs with the paper, sat on my bed, and looked at the math. The total wasn't crazy expensive, but the message was louder than the money. They didn't want a mother in their home. They wanted someone to pay rent. A few days later, I found Marcus in the kitchen looking through a small black book. When I walked in, he closed it too fast. He put it on the counter and smiled like nothing happened. Later that night, when they went out, I checked the drawer where I kept my personal papers. It was slightly moved. The folders had been shifted around. Some of the papers weren't where I had left them. I didn't need proof to know. I had lived long enough to trust what I felt. Something was happening behind my back. The next morning at breakfast, Sarah casually brought up planning for when old people die. She asked if I'd ever thought about making my bank account simpler. She said she read that shared accounts were easier for emergencies. Then she talked about her friend's mother, who had put everything in a special account for her kids, so there were no problems later. I didn't answer. She kept talking. She said it wasn't about money. It was about being clear, about getting ready for the future, about having peace of mind. Marcus added that he could help with the paperwork if I needed it. He'd done it for his work clients. He had the forms. He could make it easy. I looked down at my cereal. The milk had gotten warm. The spoon felt heavy. That same day, I called my money advisor from my car. I didn't want to talk inside the house. I told him to set up warnings on all my accounts, block any changes, and watch for anyone trying to get in who shouldn't be there. He asked if everything was okay. I said it was just to be safe. By the end of that week, Sarah gave me a packet of papers. She said she had already written up a sample form to give her control over my money, just to get things started. Her voice sounded casual, like she was offering me a cookie recipe. But her eyes stared at mine too long. I didn't open the packet. I set it aside and asked her how the kids were doing in school. She didn't push it then. But 2 days later, Marcus brought it up again. This time, when we were alone in the garage, he said Sarah was just trying to help. He said I was lucky to have a daughter who cared so much. Then he said with a smile that was too smooth that money only causes problems when people keep secrets. I stepped around him, walked back inside, and locked my bedroom door. That night, I looked at every single account I had. I changed all my passwords. I wrote down names of people I could trust. I scanned and saved copies to a small computer drive that I hid inside my suitcase lining. I didn't sleep much. I wasn't scared yet, but I had started getting ready. It wasn't fear talking. It was my brain recognizing a pattern. And I had seen this pattern before. I just hadn't wanted to believe it until now. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Someone had been watching all of this unfold. Someone I never expected to become my guardian angel. The third week blurred into the fourth, and with it came a strange change in the house. It was in the way Marcus's footsteps got louder in the hallway, how Sarah stopped knocking before coming into my room, and how the grandkids suddenly became too busy to spend time with Grandma. Small separations built up slowly, then all at once. It started the morning I found my pill organizer in the wrong drawer. I had put it under my bed like always, but that day it sat on top of my dresser, open. The Tuesday section was empty, even though I hadn't taken anything yet. I didn't panic. I didn't accuse anyone. I just threw away those pills and started using new ones from my travel supply. I started carrying my important things in a zippered bag that never left my side. I stopped leaving my coffee alone. One afternoon, I heard Marcus in the backyard talking too loudly on his phone. He was walking by the shed, his voice angry. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard him mention house value, combining accounts, and legal guardianship. Later that day, Sarah asked if I would mind signing a few forms for her house refinancing. She said it was just routine paperwork. I asked her why my name was listed as co-owner of a second mortgage. She paused just long enough. Then she said it must have been a mistake by the bank. I knew then that I had not understood how far they were willing to go. That night, I pulled out the manila envelope I kept hidden under my suitcase lining. Inside were old records from my husband's accounts, legal copies of my trust, and a complete list of everything I owned. Everything had been kept separate since he died. That was always our plan. Marcus and Sarah didn't know that my name had never been attached to the Colorado house they thought I owned. They assumed I had nothing but the apartment and retirement account. But the truth was, I still had access to other investments, some of them in other countries. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't dependent on them. The next day I went to the bank quietly. I asked to speak to the manager. I showed my identification and asked them to review any recent attempts to access accounts tied to my social security number. There had been 2 failed attempts to log in from an IP address tied to Marcus's business. I asked the manager to set the highest security level, fingerprint access, in-person-only changes, and voice-verified transactions. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded and made it happen. I got home before sunset. Dinner was already on the table. Sarah had made pork roast with overcooked carrots. Marcus asked how my day had been. I said, I went to the park. He nodded, satisfied. That night, I barely slept, not from fear, but from a growing sense that something big was about to break. And it did. 3 days later, I woke up to find my room torn apart. My suitcase was unzipped, my drawers pulled open, even the lining in my coat was ripped. My computer drive was gone. When your own family rips apart your room like thieves in the night, survival becomes a fight. If you don't subscribe right now, comment below and tell me how you could stay silent while watching dignity get stolen. I stood quietly in the doorway, heart pounding. Then I walked downstairs. Sarah was in the kitchen. She didn't look up. Marcus was by the refrigerator, arms crossed. I asked if anyone had been in my room. Sarah said maybe one of the kids went in looking for scissors. Marcus said maybe I had lost something. They said it too quickly. I didn't respond. I went back upstairs, closed the door, and picked up the landline phone I had hidden behind the bookshelf. It was a backup line I kept for emergencies, something my husband and I had used years ago when dealing with a real estate scam. I dialed a number I hadn't called in a long time. My lawyer's office. His assistant answered. I gave her a code word. She transferred me right away. Within minutes, my attorney confirmed he could lock down everything. I asked him to activate the safety measure in my trust, remove any shared power of attorney rights, and notify my offshore account manager that fraud had been attempted. I also asked him to make a report to Adult Protective Services just to put something on record. I wasn't accusing yet, but I wanted a trail. Then I packed a small overnight bag with only the essentials. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I simply took action. That evening, as I came down the stairs, I saw Marcus standing by the fireplace, holding my computer drive. He didn't say anything. He looked smug. Sarah stood behind him, her face hard to read. I told them I was going out for a walk. They didn't stop me. At the corner of the block, I got into a black car waiting for me. My attorney had sent a driver. We drove straight to a safe place I had arranged years ago, a small house in Flagstaff owned by an old college friend who owed me a favor. The next day, I froze all joint assets, placed a fraud alert, moved everything into a protected, unchangeable trust, and for the first time in weeks, I slept. Not deeply, but without looking over my shoulder. But here's what I hadn't told you yet. Remember that guardian angel I mentioned? Her name was Detective Rosa Martinez. She had been quietly investigating financial crimes against elderly people in our area, and she had been watching Marcus for months. The silence in the safe house was different. It didn't echo like the big house. It wrapped around me like a warm blanket. For the first time in weeks, I could hear my own breathing again. I sat at the kitchen table that evening with a cup of mint tea, looking at the stack of documents my lawyer had sent over. Every page had a clear purpose. Every signature I made that night pulled a little piece of my life back into my hands. Over the next 3 days, I stayed in that quiet little house in Flagstaff, with the curtains closed and the phones turned off. I didn't watch the news. I didn't scroll through anything on my phone. I just thought. I thought about how it got this far. How two people I had once held as babies could turn so calculating, so cold. On the 4th morning, I got an email from the bank. There had been another attempted login using old information. Then another email from my lawyer. He had spoken to the trust administrator. All my money had been moved. The new structure was untouchable, unchangeable, and the backup trustees I had named long ago, 2 women from my book club, both retired teachers, were now legally in charge if anything ever happened to me. That same afternoon, I called the lead investigator at Adult Protective Services. They had already opened a quiet investigation just as a precaution. I gave them everything. Every incident, every document, every photo I had secretly taken of my drawer after it was searched through. I gave them a timeline down to the hour of when I started noticing the manipulation. I wasn't pressing charges, not yet, but I wanted it on record. The officer I spoke with was patient and careful. She didn't offer false comfort, but she did say something I hadn't heard in a long time. She said I had done the right thing. She said I wasn't alone. Later that evening, I drove back to the city. I didn't go to their house. I went to my friend Patricia's home. She greeted me with open arms. No questions, no judgment. Just a hot casserole and a clean guest room. While I was there, I finally let myself feel the weight. The betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about erasure. They hadn't just tried to steal my accounts. They had tried to erase my independence, replace my choices with their convenience. But they failed. And that truth held me steady when the letter came. It was a printed notice from a law firm representing Marcus and Sarah. The tone was cold. They said they were concerned about my sudden disappearance and wanted a voluntary meeting to discuss a revised estate structure. They claimed I might be under bad influence, that others might be forcing me to cut them out. They mentioned my age, my recent confusion. I gave the letter to my lawyer. He smiled as he read it, then made a copy, highlighted every loaded phrase, and wrote a reply that was firm but polite. He included proof of my mental capacity, recent cognitive evaluations I had done during a routine physical, and outlined the timeline of events I had already documented. Then he copied Adult Protective Services and the Federal Oversight Board on the response. The next day, Detective Martinez from the Financial Crimes Unit contacted me. The bank had flagged the earlier login attempts as part of a wider pattern of elder exploitation they were investigating. Marcus's name had come up before. Sarah's too. I sat across the table from Detective Martinez 2 days later. I told her everything. Not just the facts, but the emotional manipulation. The way Sarah would drop comments about my health. The way Marcus used silence to control my responses. How they both slowly chipped away at my independence, disguised as concern. Detective Martinez nodded, took notes, and asked if I'd be willing to testify, if necessary. I said yes. But more than anything, I asked for protection for the future, for other women like me. Here's where Detective Martinez revealed something that shocked me. She said, "Mrs. Thompson, you're not the first elderly person Marcus and Sarah have targeted. We've been building a case against them for months. Your situation was the missing piece we needed. It turned out that Sarah's friend from the book club, Elena Rodriguez, had been working undercover with the police. Elena had noticed the patterns when Sarah started asking too many questions about other members' financial situations during our monthly meetings. Elena was actually a retired social worker who specialized in elder abuse cases. When Elena saw what was happening to me, she contacted Detective Martinez. They had been secretly documenting everything: the way Marcus and Sarah isolated me from my friends, how they controlled my access to my own money, even how they were slowly medicating me to make me appear confused. In the following week, I met with my attorney again to write a formal statement. It would be held in confidence unless the investigation moved to formal charges.
But it was clear now.
I hadn't overreacted. I hadn't imagined things. I had seen it clearly, and I had responded correctly. The final action I took that week was meaningful. I changed the name of the charitable fund I had created years ago with my late husband. Originally named after our anniversary date, I now called it the Elizabeth Foundation, after my grandmother, the strongest woman I ever knew. I restructured it so that every year a portion of its earnings would be given to women over 65 who had survived financial abuse from their families. I didn't need revenge. I needed purpose. And with that change, I felt something shift inside me, a kind of freedom. The anger didn't disappear, but it stopped burning. By the end of the month, I had officially moved. Patricia helped me find a 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood with wide sidewalks and tall oak trees. I unpacked slowly, placed photos of my husband on the shelves, framed a copy of the trust certificate with my grandmother's name at the top. I made tea that evening, stood at the window, and watched the wind move through the trees. I had lost a family, yes, but I had also found something I didn't know I was missing: myself. 2 weeks passed. I kept to myself, living quietly in the apartment Patricia helped me find. No social media, no phone calls unless necessary. The days were still and healing. I started walking again each morning just before sunrise, with no music in my ears, just the sound of gravel under my feet and the birds waking up. Then came the letter from the probate court. It had been sent to my old address, but forwarded by my lawyer. Inside was a petition filed by Sarah and Marcus requesting a formal hearing to declare me unfit to manage my estate. They were using the Elder Concern Act, claiming I was mentally compromised and being isolated by outside parties for financial gain. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so cruel. Attached were signed statements from 2 of their friends, people I had met no more than once or twice. They spoke of my confusion, my supposed forgetfulness, and an incident at a family barbecue where I supposedly asked the same question 3 times. It was ridiculous, but it was filed in court, and that meant it was now public record. I met with my attorney again. He didn't flinch. He had expected this. He laid out a plan, clean and calm, just like he always did. We would respond with documentation, my evaluations from Dr. Kim, my cognitive assessments, and sworn statements from my financial advisor, 2 neighbors, and 3 members of the church committee I had served on for 6 years. These people had known me far longer and more personally than Marcus and Sarah's planted witnesses. But there was something else, something unexpected. Detective Martinez reached out again. They had found surveillance footage from bank cameras, not mine, but the bank's. 2 separate attempts by Marcus to access accounts tied to my name, each time using documents that had been flagged as altered. That alone wouldn't result in charges, but combined with the pattern, it built a case. They were getting ready to bring it to the district attorney. That same evening, I sat down with Patricia. I told her everything. I hadn't shared all the details before. She listened, didn't interrupt, and then offered me something I hadn't considered. She suggested I write a letter to the court myself, not just a legal response, but a personal one. She said, "Speak as a woman, not a client. Let the judge hear your voice before they ever see your face." It took me a day to decide. Then I sat down with pen in hand and wrote by hand first. For pages, not just facts, but feelings. I wrote about my childhood, about raising Sarah, about her curiosity, her laughter. I wrote about the moment I realized she had changed. I described the silence between us that grew louder over the years, and I explained in simple terms that protecting myself was not cruelty. It was clarity, and it had come far too late. My attorney typed it up for the court. It was added to the response packet along with supporting documents. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Those 3 weeks passed with a strange stillness, not calm, but suspended. I didn't hear from Sarah or Marcus. Not a word. But the local papers picked up rumors of the probate filing. It was a small city after all. People whispered. Old friends called. Most just left voicemails. I didn't return them. Not yet. On the morning of the hearing, I wore a navy blue suit I hadn't touched since my husband's funeral. I brushed my hair smooth and pinned it back. I carried no purse, only a folder with my name on it and a heart that had learned not to shake. Courtrooms are colder than they look. I sat beside my attorney. Marcus and Sarah were on the other side. Sarah wouldn't look at me. Marcus did just once, and then turned away. The judge entered. The hearing began. Their attorney spoke first. He painted me as disconnected, unstable, prey to manipulation. He used words like isolated, withdrawn, emotionally unstable. Then he introduced their witnesses, the same two people from before. They spoke in vague terms, heard from someone else, saw something once. Then came our turn. My attorney introduced the evaluations, the statements, the timeline. He walked through the pattern of control and coercion, then placed the letter I wrote on the record. The judge read it silently at the bench. When she looked up, she said only this, that it was rare in her courtroom to see such clarity from someone being accused of incapacity. The judge dismissed the petition without delay. She called the filing not just unfounded, but an abusive process. She referred the matter for further review. She fought back in court and won. If you're still not subscribed after seeing Justice Served, you'd better go to the comments and explain why you'd ignore the fight of a 73-year-old woman who refused to be erased. We walked out without a word to Marcus or Sarah. There was nothing left to say. Back home, I made tea and sat on the balcony for the first time. The sky was wide, pale gold. The air smelled like rain. Later that evening, I got an email from a small women's advocacy group. Someone at the court had passed along my letter. They asked if I would speak at an upcoming forum, not about the legal case, but about resilience, about reclaiming identity, about surviving quiet betrayals. I closed the laptop, not ready yet. But the thought stayed with me because maybe healing didn't look like closure. Maybe it looked like this, a quiet place, a name restored, and a voice that had finally found its volume again. The week after the hearing, something inside me shifted. It wasn't relief. Not exactly. It was something quieter, more hollow, like standing in a house that had been emptied out. The echoes weren't loud, but they were everywhere. I had won, yes, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like walking away from a battlefield alone, carrying only the silence of what was lost. That weekend, I stayed in. Patricia dropped by with groceries and a few tulips. I didn't say much, and she didn't press. She just sat beside me while I watered the plants and cleaned out the kitchen drawers. It was the first time I truly noticed how still my hands had become. No shake, no tightness, just a slow steadiness, like something was finally settling. That night, I sat at the little table by the window and opened the storage box I had carried with me from the old house. Inside were photos, journals, and the leather folder that held all the old letters Marcus had sent me when Sarah was in college. His childish handwriting, his little jokes, the promises he used to make to take care of me when I got old. I stared at one letter for a long time, then quietly set it aside. I pulled out my own journal. Not the one for lists or passwords, but the one with no lines, the one I hadn't written in since the year after my husband passed. I turned to a fresh page and wrote one line. I am still here. I wasn't sure what I meant exactly, but the words felt real, grounded. 3 days later, I met with my lawyer again. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to talk through the next steps, not legal steps, personal ones. He brought up the trust, the Elizabeth Foundation, and how the first round of grants could be released within 6 months. He mentioned that the applications were already coming in, women of all ages with stories of loss, survival, quiet reinvention. Then he looked at me and asked if I wanted to remain anonymous. I thought about that for a long time. I thought about what it meant to be visible, to have your name attached to something that others might one day hold on to in their darkest hour. To stand up, not in spite of what happened, but because of it. I told him no. I wanted my name on it. That evening, I took a walk around the neighborhood. I passed a park with benches painted in pale blue and children running in circles. I sat for a moment, letting the late light hit my face, and I thought about Sarah, not with anger, not even disappointment, just stillness. She had made her choice. Marcus, too. And now I had made mine. But this time, it wasn't reactive. It wasn't about protecting what I had. It was about choosing what I wanted to become. Back home, I made tea, then opened a blank document on my laptop. For the first time in years, I started writing my story. Not as a case, not as an article, but as a life. A full, flawed, quiet life. Mine. It began with the line I had written in my journal, "I am still here." And from there, the words came like water. 3 weeks after choosing to go public with my name on the Elizabeth Foundation, a letter arrived from the office of a federal investigator. It was addressed to me directly, not through my lawyer, not through any legal channel. Hand-signed, neat handwriting, no red tape, just a quiet sentence at the bottom. They were reopening the investigation into Marcus. My fingers didn't shake when I set the letter down. I didn't feel fear, just a tightness in my chest that told me the past wasn't finished with me yet. The next day, I met with the investigator. He looked far too young to be holding such power, but his eyes were patient. He explained that several suspicious financial transfers had been flagged in the broader investigation into elder exploitation in our county, and 2 names kept coming up, Marcus and Sarah. I listened. I gave them what I had. But more importantly, I gave them what no one else could, the story behind the numbers. Not a rant, not a list of complaints, just facts, calm and sharp as glass. How Sarah had slowly gained access to my digital accounts. How Marcus had pushed me to sign over power of attorney without giving me time to think. How I had once believed this was normal, even loving. The investigator leaned forward. He told me they had subpoenaed the bank for voice recordings tied to wire transfers. In one of them, a man had identified himself as my son-in-law using my full name and social security number. The problem was the voice wasn't mine, and the permission had never been recorded. The wheels of justice were turning now, and I was no longer the only one seeing the gears move. That night, I sat alone in the living room with every light off. Just the hum of the refrigerator in the next room. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. But I felt it, that low hum of reckoning. It didn't taste like vengeance. It tasted like gravity. 2 days later, Patricia stopped by. She brought a binder thick with reports and recommendations from the board we had quietly assembled for the Elizabeth Foundation. They wanted to expand more applicants, more outreach, a partnership with a university program that trained women in digital literacy and finance. I looked through the proposal and paused at a paragraph buried near the end, a speaker series, women over 60, sharing real stories of rebuilding, quiet battles, and silent triumphs. They had penciled me in. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. That night, I sat on the balcony again. The air was thick with early summer heat. A siren passed 2 streets over. I didn't flinch. I thought about what it meant to speak, not whisper, not journal, speak. And not just for myself, but for the hundreds of other women I had read about in the Foundation's early applications. Stories filled with disbelief, gaslighting, financial erasure, betrayal dressed up as care. My story wasn't rare. That was the hardest part. It was common, silent, ordinary. That silence needed to break. So I agreed. I stood up for the first of the small gatherings 2 weeks later. A modest community space in the basement of the local library. Folding chairs, coffee and paper cups, no microphones. I told them the truth. Not everything, just enough. I told them I was 73. That I had raised a daughter I loved with everything in me. That I had watched her walk away, not in one loud moment, but in 100 quiet choices. I told them about Marcus and the bathroom floor and the silence that followed. But mostly I told them about waking up. About the day I realized survival was not the end goal. That dignity mattered more than peace. That no inheritance, no bloodline, no shared last name could ever outrank the voice inside a woman when she finally said enough. There were no cheers, no applause, just silence and a few tears. But that silence felt different now. Not the silence of shame, the silence of recognition. Afterward, a woman named Eleanor took my hand. She was 75. Her daughter had taken her home equity line and disappeared. She hadn't told anyone until that night. As she spoke, her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. And I realized that this was the true legacy. Not the foundation, not the courtroom victory, not even the name I had cleared. It was the simple fact that somewhere in that room, a woman had breathed a little easier because I had spoken first. By late summer, the name Elizabeth Foundation had started to circle quietly through nonprofit spaces and retirement communities. Nothing flashy, just quiet momentum. I never intended it to become big, but sometimes when you plant something honest, it grows. I had agreed to speak again, this time at a women's center in Scottsdale, about 40 minutes from my place. They had printed little flyers, just my name, a time, and a title I hadn't chosen, Speaking Through Silence. The title sat heavy in my chest the whole drive there. The room was warm when I arrived. Fluorescent lights, coffee already brewing. I sat in the back while the organizers checked the seating. I didn't wear anything special, just a blue knit top, cotton pants, and the silver watch Marcus had given me in 1986. Funny how I still wore it. Not for the sentiment, just because it told time well. When it was time to speak, I didn't rehearse. I simply stepped forward and told the truth again, a different shade of it. This time, I spoke more about what came after, about what it felt like to sit in your own home again without waiting for footsteps to come up behind you, about learning how to cook for one and not feel pity, about paying your own bills and feeling grateful for the quiet click of confirmation. I saw a few women nod. One reached for her purse to dab her eyes. Afterward, a woman with salt and pepper hair asked if she could walk me to my car. Her name was Julia, 73. Her story unfolded slowly, but I recognized the rhythm. A daughter who took over her finances, a son-in-law who handled the paperwork, and suddenly she couldn't access her own checking account. She whispered that she had no one else to tell. So I gave her the number, not mine, the center's, and told her to call in the morning. They had volunteers trained for exactly this. She held the paper like it was a lifeline. That night I couldn't sleep, not from nerves, from something else. It was the weight of it all, the stories piling up like fallen leaves, each one rustling with the same ache. There was no end to them, and for the first time, I wondered if I was strong enough to keep holding space for them. The next morning, I made oatmeal and stared out the kitchen window. The air was still, too. I could feel something shifting again, but I couldn't name it. 2 days later, my lawyer called. The federal investigation had moved forward. Charges were being finalized. There were multiple counts: identity theft, elder abuse, financial coercion. Marcus's name was listed. So was Sarah's. The news didn't shock me, but it still stung. The part that caught me off guard was the press request. A journalist from a respected outlet had been following the foundation's development. They wanted to feature the Elizabeth Foundation in a national story about financial abuse against seniors. They asked if I would go on record fully. I said I needed a day. I walked for hours through streets I hadn't seen in years, past the post office, the old community theater, a bakery that now sold vegan muffins and lavender tea. The world had changed so much, and I had spent years just trying to survive inside of it. But now I was standing in it, and maybe it was time to stop hiding. So I agreed. The article came out a week later. My name, my face, a photo of me standing in front of the library after one of the talks. Sunlight catching the edge of my hair. The headline was simple. She spoke up. There were no angry calls from Sarah. No letters from Marcus. Just silence, but not the kind that haunted. This silence felt earned. The following week, something unexpected happened. A young woman from a local university reached out. She was studying nonprofit leadership and wanted to intern with the Elizabeth Foundation. She said her grandmother had been one of the first women to apply and had cried reading the acceptance letter. She said she wanted to help other women feel that same relief. I told her yes, not just because we needed help, but because I saw something in her, a continuity, proof that what we were building wasn't about me. It was bigger. That afternoon, as I filed grant paperwork and updated budgets, I realized something. I hadn't thought about Marcus or Sarah in hours. Not from fear, not from pain, just hadn't thought of them. They had finally stopped living in my head. And that, more than any court decision or headline, felt like the real beginning. The day the letter arrived, I had just come back from the hardware store with a new light bulb and a bottle of vinegar. I saw the envelope sitting on the porch table, out of place, cream-colored and thick. No return address, just my name written in sharp, deliberate handwriting. I knew that script. It was Sarah's. My fingers didn't shake. I just opened it. Inside was a single page. It wasn't long, a few sentences at most. She said she'd heard about the Elizabeth Foundation, that she'd seen my picture in the article, and that Marcus had told her they had made mistakes, that now he wanted to make peace, that they would like to meet for dinner, just a quiet evening, just to talk. She had included a location, a restaurant in a part of town I hadn't been to in years, not far from the courthouse, actually. The timing was casual. Friday, 7 p.m. I placed the letter down and went to boil water. I didn't need time to decide. I wasn't going, but I didn't tear it up either. I let it sit for 2 full days untouched next to the kitchen clock. I suppose I wanted to understand why I wasn't angry anymore, why the invitation didn't sting, why the silence inside me felt so firm. By Friday afternoon, I had forgotten the letter completely. It wasn't until the sun began to fall, and I saw the light outside shift to that strange gold hue that I remembered. 7 p.m. And then at 7:30, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again and again. Finally, I picked up. It was a nurse from the emergency room. Sarah had been admitted with chest pains, mild, but enough to trigger a workup. They had found my number listed as next of kin. She had written my name. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone pressed to my ear. I could hear voices in the background, machines beeping, and for a moment the air around me seemed to shrink. I asked the nurse if she was stable. She said yes, then paused, said Sarah had asked for me, said she was alone. I didn't answer right away. I looked down at my hands, at the veins, the skin, the marks of time that never used to be there. I thought of the woman who had dragged me by the hair, who had slammed the front door in my face, who had made me feel invisible in my own home. And then I thought of the little girl who once fell asleep on my chest every Sunday afternoon after church, who cried when she lost her stuffed elephant, who used to braid my hair with her tiny fingers and whisper that I smelled like lavender and paper. So I went, not because I forgave her, but because something in me needed to see her as she was now. The room was quiet when I entered. She looked smaller than I remembered, her hair tied back loosely, and 4 dripping slowly beside her. She opened her eyes and blinked. For a moment, I saw no recognition, and then her mouth moved. She said my name. I didn't speak. I just pulled the chair closer and sat down. The nurse nodded and closed the door behind me. We sat in silence for a while. Then Sarah said she had read everything, the articles, the statements, the interviews. She said she hadn't realized how far she had gone, that she hadn't known what she had become, that Marcus was the one who kept pushing, that she just wanted to protect what they had built. I listened. I didn't respond. Then she asked something unexpected. She asked if I had meant for the Elizabeth Foundation to be a message to her. I shook my head. I told her it was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming breath. Her eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. She said she couldn't undo what she had done, but she wanted to start again. Not as mother and daughter, not as anything labeled, just two people who once shared something true. I stood up then, not abruptly, just slow, measured. I told her I didn't hate her, but I also told her I didn't belong to her anymore, that my peace didn't depend on her regret. And then I walked out. Outside, the sky had turned navy. The hospital parking lot buzzed with motion. I exhaled, not relief, something deeper. I had just looked into the eyes of the woman who once broke me, and she no longer held any power. That night, I made soup, not because I was hungry, but because I wanted to taste something warm and quiet. I lit a candle, not for prayer, just for the calm flicker. And for the first time in years, I slept through the night without waking once. The morning after my visit to the hospital, I brewed a stronger cup of coffee than usual, the kind that clings to your throat a little longer. I stood by the window, watching the postman pass by like clockwork, his bag swinging with familiar rhythm. But that day, he didn't stop at my mailbox. He crossed the lawn, handed me an envelope directly. It was from the office of the United States Attorney. I closed the door and sat down before opening it. My fingers moved with steady purpose, but inside my heart was bracing, not with fear, with readiness. The letter confirmed what I had quietly hoped for. Federal charges were being brought against Marcus. Fraud, coercion, financial abuse of an elder. It listed dates, filings, testimonies, and my name appeared more than once, not as a victim, but as a key witness. There had been an anonymous tip submitted to the IRS 3 months earlier. The audit had revealed enough to initiate a broader investigation. Apparently, I was not the only one Marcus had tried to manipulate. The truth was unraveling. But here's the part one didn't expect. The anonymous tip had come from Sarah, the same woman who had looked at me with hollow eyes just days earlier. The same woman who had dragged me out by my hair. I read the page again slowly. The truth sank in with the weight of wet wool. She had turned him in quietly before the dinner invitation, before the hospital visit. She had done it alone. I didn't know if it was guilt or fear or something else entirely. Maybe it didn't matter. What mattered was that she had cracked open the very house she had helped build. I placed the letter down and looked at the stack of seed catalogs by the window. Spring was near. The soil was thawing. I thought of the tomatoes I might try again this year. A week later, a federal officer showed up at my door. He wore plain clothes, but the badge in his wallet was real. He said my testimony would help speed up the case. Said Marcus had already been approached for questioning, that his tone had shifted the moment he realized Sarah had cooperated. There was no arrest yet, but I could see the arc of consequence beginning to curve. When the officer left, I sat in silence for nearly an hour. I didn't call anyone, didn't text. I simply walked around the house slowly, touching the old furniture, the wooden edges of door frames, the kitchen drawer that stuck a little when it rained. These were the pieces that held me, the ones they never touched, the parts they never stole. That night, I sat in the living room and turned on the television, not to watch anything, but to hear voices. I had forgotten what it was like to be surrounded by noise that didn't cut. Then I reached for the journal I had been keeping in a small drawer under the coffee table. The one I started the week after I left their house. I flipped to a blank page and began writing. Not about them, but about me. About the parts of me I had found again. My spine, my silence, my pulse in the early hours when I walked barefoot through the hallway and felt no fear about the slow unfurling of dignity after being buried for years under the weight of someone else's version of family. I didn't need justice to look like sirens and handcuffs. I just needed them to know I had survived, and that I had done it without their permission. When the phone rang later that evening, I let it go to voicemail. It was Sarah. Her voice was low. She said Marcus had left the house, that federal agents had come earlier that day, that he had packed a suitcase and slammed the door without looking back. She said she didn't know where he went. Then she said she was sorry again, but it didn't sound like an apology this time. It sounded like release. I didn't return the call. Instead, I stood up, walked outside, and breathed in the air. Cold, but clean. I wrapped my shawl tighter and listened to the leaves whisper. No one screamed, no one banged doors, no one stood behind me. For the first time in a long while, I was exactly where I wanted to be. And in the quiet hum of a world still turning, I smiled. Not from triumph, but from peace earned. 3 days after I let Sarah's call go to voicemail, a letter arrived from my attorney. I almost didn't open it right away. My mornings had become sacred again. I took my coffee slower, let the sun roll across the wooden floors without rushing it, but something about the envelope tugged at me. It was thick. I opened it with careful fingers. Inside was a copy of a legal document that made me sit down. Apparently, months ago, before the confrontation, before the dinner, before the bruises, I had signed a document I didn't remember. It had something to do with consolidating assets into a trust. I remembered Marcus talking fast, printing things off his computer. I thought I had reviewed them, but this one had never come through me, and now it was showing up under my name. The trust transferred nearly $3 million from my brokerage account to a holding entity under Marcus's name. The transfer hadn't completed because of an alert placed by the bank following a flagged request, one that came in while I was at the hospital. The letter continued. My lawyer had taken it upon himself to cross-check the records, and in doing so discovered something else entirely. Sarah's name had been added to the trust, but only conditionally. It would activate on my official declaration of incapacity. I held the paper in my hands and felt the chill settle through me. My own daughter had sat down at a table and signed documents, assuming I would one day lose the ability to speak for myself. She had built a future based on my absence, and Marcus had guided the pen. But that wasn't the worst part. The lawyer's letter ended with a single handwritten sentence. He said he had a hunch, so he'd run my medical file legally against the timing of the trust preparation. The dates lined up with my fall. The fall I had assumed was an accident. The bruise on my neck, the dizziness, the medication I never remembered taking. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. They had tried to incapacitate me. Quietly, slowly, legally. They had anticipated resistance, but not survival. And now that entire paper trail sat in a manila folder in the attorney's office under lock and key with a time-stamped log that made it legally impossible to argue ignorance. I walked outside after reading the letter. The wind was sharper than usual. I didn't mind. I needed it. I needed something real to press against my skin. I sat on the back steps and pulled the sleeves of my sweater down over my hands. I thought about all the meals I had cooked in that kitchen for Sarah when she was young. I thought about the quiet years after her father died. How we had survived with just enough. How I had gone back to work at the local college's admissions office just to keep things moving. She never knew what I gave up. That was the point. She was never supposed to. But now the woman she had become had not only turned her back on me, she had waited for me to disappear. She had signed her name to it. And Marcus. He had planned the entire thing like a chess match, cold, detached, believing I would never notice the checkmate coming. He had underestimated the one thing that mattered. I had lived through worse. The chapter of my life that included Sarah and Marcus was coming to a close, but not with a scream, not with courtroom drama, just a woman on her back porch holding her coffee tighter, her pulse steadier, and her dignity completely intact. Because survival isn't loud, it's quiet and powerful and absolute. It was a Thursday morning when I walked into the courthouse alone. No makeup, no jewelry, no rush. The documents had already been filed. My attorney had handled everything. But I came anyway, to feel it, to stand on the cold marble and watch a chapter of my life seal itself shut. The court clerk looked up, recognized my name, and nodded quietly. The cancellation of the trust was approved in chambers. The frozen funds were returned. The invalid power of attorney was nullified, and my name, my full legal, untarnished name, was reinstated as the sole authority on my life. It didn't come with applause. No one cheered. But something deep inside me exhaled for the first time in months. Outside, I sat on the bench across from the courthouse steps. The sun felt warmer than it had in weeks. I had brought a small flask of tea. I sipped it slowly, feeling the warmth spread through me, calming, steady. A woman passed by, older than me, with a small dog in a stroller. We locked eyes just briefly. I gave her a soft nod, and for a split second, it felt like she knew. Not the whole story, just the weight of surviving something and still standing. When I got home, I didn't go straight inside. I walked the side of the house and stood at the old potting bench. My hands itched to be in the soil, to press something living back into the earth. That afternoon, I planted 3 trays of pansies, purple and white. Hardy little things. They don't look like much at first, but they last through frost. They come back even after the cold tries to wipe them out. A week later, Marcus called. I let it ring. He left a voicemail. His voice was lower than usual. Said he was sorry. Said Sarah wanted to talk. Said they had made mistakes. I deleted it. A few days after that, an envelope arrived. No return address, just my name. Inside was a photo. Sarah, younger, holding her daughter, smiling. The edges were worn. I held it for a moment. I didn't cry, but I didn't throw it away either. I placed it in the drawer of my desk, the one I don't open often, the one where I keep the things that matter, but no longer define me. I'm not angry anymore. Not exactly. There's a silence now, a different kind of quiet. Not absence, more like clarity, like a room that has finally been cleaned of echoes that no longer belong. And I've found something in that silence.
Peace.
Not the kind that comes from justice, but the kind that comes from knowing I chose myself, that I reclaimed my breath, my voice, my place. I no longer live in reaction to what they did. I live in response to who I've become. But here's the twist that changes everything. Detective Martinez called me last week with news that made my hands shake for the first time in months. It turns out Elena Rodriguez, my friend from the book club, who I thought was just a retired social worker, was actually much more than that. Elena had been working undercover for the FBI for over 2 years, investigating a network of financial predators who specifically targeted elderly women. Marcus and Sarah weren't just opportunistic family members. They were part of a larger criminal organization. Elena had been placed in our book club specifically to monitor Sarah's behavior after another elderly woman in our community had reported suspicious activity involving her daughter and son-in-law. That woman had been too frightened to press charges, but her report had started the investigation. Detective Martinez explained that Elena had been documenting everything from day one. The way Sarah asked probing questions about other members' finances during our meetings. How she would casually inquire about who managed their money, who had power of attorney, who lived alone. Elena had even recorded conversations where Sarah and Marcus discussed their system for identifying and targeting vulnerable seniors. They had done this to at least 6 other families in 3 different states. If exposing a criminal network preying on the elderly doesn't push you to subscribe, then leave a comment below and explain why standing against predators means nothing to you. The $3 million they tried to steal from me wasn't just greed. It was the final score they needed to disappear completely. They had been planning to leave the country. But because I fought back, because I trusted my instincts and protected myself, their entire operation was exposed. The other victims, women ranging in age from 68 to 84, are now getting their money back. 3 of them had lost their homes. 2 had been placed in nursing facilities against their will after being declared incompetent. All of them are free now because I refuse to be silent. As I sit here today, 6 months after that terrible night when Marcus punched me and Sarah dragged me by my hair, I realized something profound. I didn't just save myself. I saved 5 other women who might never have found their voices without mine leading the way. The Elizabeth Foundation has grown beyond anything I ever imagined. We've helped 127 women in the past 6 months recover over $4.8 million in stolen assets. We've partnered with law enforcement agencies in 12 states to identify and prosecute elder financial abuse. But more importantly, we've created a network of women who refuse to be silently victimized. Women who speak up. Women who protect each other. Sarah was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. Marcus got 12 years. The house in Phoenix was sold to pay restitution to their victims. Sarah's children are living with Marcus's sister in Denver, and I send them birthday cards every year. They're innocent in all of this, and someday when they're older, I hope they'll understand that sometimes love means saying no. I still live in my quiet apartment in Phoenix. I still tend my pansies. I still drink tea every evening and watch the sun set through my kitchen window. But now I also travel twice a month, speaking to groups of women and law enforcement agencies about recognizing the signs of financial elder abuse. I tell them my story, not for sympathy, but for strength. Because if a 73-year-old widow from Phoenix can stand up to criminal predators and win, anyone can. The most important thing I've learned through all of this is that survival isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about protecting others who might not yet have the strength to protect themselves. My voice didn't just save my life. It saved the lives of women I'll never meet, in places I'll never visit, who are sleeping a little safer tonight because I chose to speak up instead of staying quiet. If this story reminds you of someone who once tried to silence your worth, I hope you know it's never too late to take your voice back. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved to protect the part of you they kept trying to erase? Your story matters too. Share it below if you'd like, or just know you're not alone. And remember, when someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Your instincts are usually right, and your voice is always worth fighting for.